right, so I want to begin thinking about a certain a certain segment of argumentation with regard to religion, specifically Christianity, and that having to do with the question morality of God in the Old Testament, as one can observe different instances where God is said to command or approve of certain acts uh, that we as humans would see as immoral, as evil, or have a hard time seeing how they cannot be immoral or evil. And this little segment of argumentation is widely touched on, specifically in atheists and in deconstruction platforms in general, those circles in general. So I want to take some time to think about some considerations because, well, and from my personal experience in atheist and deconstruction circles that I have been, I guess, privileged to um, come in contact with and hear ideas from and hear argumentation from. Um, this yeah, one of the things that I guess that stand out to me as I listen to the argumentation, specifically when it gets onto how that, well, even if the God of the Bible is real, they would say, I would never worship a God like that because that God is clearly immoral and evil, because of the things that He commands and the things we see took place kind of under His watch or with regard to His people that seem to be looked at as okay by God. So, um, I I'm not sure how many people. Hopefully, enough of the people who are listening are familiar with the Old Testament, um, to be aware of just in general, um, some of the accounts that took place in the Old Testament. Specifically, just to name a few, I guess. For example, you have the account of the Amalekites, or you have the account of Joshua's crusade, um, as it were, campaign. Joshua's campaign to clean out the Canaanites and to purge the promised land of the Canaanites and all the different ites, the Amalekites, the Amorites, all the different ites that the nation of Israel went to war against, and who also massacred and slaughtered, as part of the command, the ban, the haram that was placed on these certain bloodlines. So, and so yeah, people are also familiar with the more the details of those accounts where um, God is said to command Israel to kill innocent people, people who weren't warriors, or people who weren't the ones actively doing the wrong that um, that it is said that judgment came upon them for doing, according to the scripture, the scriptural accounts. So, but getting back to the point, um, being I guess I'm plagued with seeing it from both ways. As deconstructing myself, I for a while held a certain perspective about that dynamic because, yeah, that question comes up. You can't read the scripture, you can't really hear teaching or hear these accounts without some kind of, yeah, alarm bell going off in one's head about my goodness, that seems this or that, because there are some counts that are pretty bad, in scripture. So when Christians talk about a God who is all good and loving, a lot of people, most people who are thoughtful, who read those things, it becomes a manner of kind of an internal conflict of how the God that's described in the Old Testament can be good, and there's just a long history of people who either don't believe the Old Testament, believe the Old Testament was not real, or believe the New Testament's not real because of the contrast of the God persona that is articulated in it seems to be articulated in both the Old and New Testament, and how different they are. So, some points of consideration, I think, that really draw the distinction, as to how I am able to have these two views, and to why, whenever I hear these certain argumentations coming from atheists or deconstructionists, I'm not quite able to sync up with their rationale or with their perspective quite so squarely. It remains maybe a sticking point in my deconstruction, as or at least being something to where one of the reasons why I would deconstruct wouldn't be because of an immorality that I see in the or a blatant immorality that I see in the part of the articulation of God in the scripture. That's not a reason that I would have. There'd be other reasons, and stuff. If the God of the scripture is is real, then and if those accounts are real, I can see how one can have those accounts, understand fully receive those accounts and all of its ugliness, and still assent that there is still there's still a righteousness on the part of God, for for that kind of reality being, in God's in the reality of God, in the reality under God. Hopefully, I'm trying to be careful how I say it. So yeah, I think I'm using a little more words to just kind of paint the idea, but just hopefully it's understood, and I'll try to definitely use less words and get more to the point as this goes on. So anyway, so some of the considerations that might make line distinction errors are having to do with viewpoints about how we view certain things about what is said to be God's attributes, or our attributes, or other things like that. So one of them being, of course, maybe this is low hanging fruit, but the anthropomorphism attributed to God the Father, I'll say, anthropomorphism. I'm writing these down for myself as I go, because I'm gonna, I'm trying to. I would like to get this into more concise things, but this is kind of a step by step working through these things for myself. So I'm writing these down as we go. So anthropomorphism, and that anthropomorphism has to do with the attribution to God of human man-like qualities. This has been, as long as people have talked about gods, there has been this anthropomorphization of them. There aren't, to my understanding, very many gods that are articulated by the different religions that aren't articulated in some kind of way of anthropomorphization. So, attributing to them human qualities, man qualities, whether it be, um, um, goodness, benevolence, anger, physical attributes as having, hands or legs, or yeah, feet, as it were, man's feet, or um, in some way, being having some likeness to mankind, or in either in, what is physical attributes or attributes of non-physical attributes. So, so this, if our anthropomorphization that has developed out of religion is not out of whack, if it's closer to accuracy, to the reality of what God is, then yeah, there is a way. In that way, it does make a distinction in how one can then, it follows that, that there has to be some kind of, more intrinsic binding of this God to the way of man, which would make him immoral for doing or okaying, or, for overseeing certain kinds of things, or even commanding them. Um, and so that's if our anthropomorphization is not out of whack. But if it is, then that it does make a difference. And, this, when, in the scriptures, now it can be defended that the scriptures themselves, make precedent for this anthropomorphization, in some ways that it articulates God in the ways that, in what God does, or or even, something like appearance in certain, passages. um, and so I understand this anthropomorphization to spring from, doctrinal concepts, that come from other passages in Scripture, like where it says that that man is, where it says, "Let us create man in our image and after our likeness." Um, and other passages that, that say that similar thing, but in kind of in different tenses. uh, I understand that from that understanding is where, a lot of the tendency for the Christian anthropomorphization of, Yahweh, comes from, where, it's an understanding that, so yeah, if we're made in God's image, and all the different ways that is explained, as far as like, body, soul, and spirit, three-partite, being, like God is, or, mind, will, and emotion, um, that tripartite structure, um, and so, there's, like I said, I understand where those images come from, but, just kind of being crazy and saying that, after all, though, those are doctrinal positions from text that might be, you know what I mean? They might, that might not be the closest to the proper understanding of what it means. So if at all that is the case, where I believe in other parts of Scripture it indicates that is the case, that as far as like the mind, will, and emotion structure that mankind seems to have is not quite in line with that mind, will, and emotion structure that is said to be possessed by God. Even that is, of course, of course, anthropomorphization. I guess I'm belaboring that point, but um, it is it's said that in other places that God's ways are not our ways, and this indication that God's way of thinking is different than ours, and the reason for and it's there's the reason given as to why that is the case. Um, it can there are existing doctrines that say that reason for that difference of our mind, will, and emotional structure is because of the fall. That if not for the fall, that mind, will, and emotion structure would be more closely aligned with that of God's because of our being made in His image, and so. And so yeah, some say that difference has to do with with our fallen nature, and then I believe there are others that just say that difference is just inherent in the creation in creation of what we are versus what God is as creature and creator. So so there are those things, different points to consider regarding anthropomorphization. Um, as an understanding, as in looking at the distinctions in this points of view regarding God's morality or culpability for the things that He said to be okay with or command in the Old Testament. Um, I think another area, of course, all these areas I believe are going to overlap in some degree, but I'm trying. Yes, I would like to um, point out areas that that are principally held as distinct from one another. So the anthropomorphization. So another thing to consider would be the life. So, sanctity of life from the perspective of God and the perspective of the creature, creator versus creature. The sacredness of life, the value of life, what life is. Um, and how it should be held. So some of the arguments I've heard regarding this point of how it seems that God indiscriminately takes the life of the innocent, and yeah, just allows and condones things like uh, um, grape and and SA and just other bad things, uh, stuff that we view and rightly view as wrong and immoral in the level in our realm, the human realm, in the level of us dealing with one another. Um, and so they say, well, God does these things, and yet, but we can't do these things, but yeah, we're supposed to say that God is moral and love that God. That's some of the things that is set out of the deconstructed and atheistic paradigm. Um, so some things, some might remember, I would imagine, in the scripture where it's talked about that where it says, that God breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul, or that there are animals, other parts of creation that have the breath of life in them, and that the traditional understanding of life is that life, the life that is our life, the life of the living things, is a life that issues out from God. It's the energy, it's the life that issues out from God, as He put it into creation, breathed it into creation. Again, there's that some of that anthropomorphic language of having, as if God has body parts like a mouth or nose or things like that, or lungs, right, to breathe his breath of life into. So again, that anthropomorphization. That's what I mean about some of that the carryover into these different concepts. So and so okay, so if it is the case, as tradition establishes, that this life comes is God's and comes from God, then it is, to me, it makes sense. It follows in a logical way that there's a real sense in that our lives, the taking of a life, is not something that God doesn't take. God does not take life in the way that we take life. That in the way that God takes life is really it is a issuing and a receiving back to Himself what's already His, what is actively His or God's. It's okay. So it's a distribution. It's a casting out. It's a throwing out of life and making creation, and it's picking it back up and bringing it back into Himself. Life. Certain Christian traditions, much of Christian tradition understands the human, the man, as being a everlasting soul, or a divine soul, a spirit that indwells a body, and that there is a fundamental kind of a separation between the spirit, the inner part of the invisible part of the body, and then the body itself. And so and and there's understood, they are argued, but there are understood distinctions between the makeup of the human and the makeup of some animal and plant life. Again, like I said, is contested. So so this life that that issues out from God, seems that it's something that remains in His possession, and that is His by rights. And so making it that there is never an actual intrinsic wrongness in the taking of life back to itself, back to God's self, back to God's center, or even God's periphery, back to itself. So and that this and that this and that the severing of the life from the body is something that, because God being the maker of the body, out of the dust of the earth, it's claimed by Scripture, and breathing into it the breath of life, you have the work of God's hands, and kind of the property, which is the energy, the life that is within the work of God's hands, that we are. And so And so even if you want to talk about not just the taking of the life, like, but even the the removing of the life from the body in ways um, that are not without medium, that are not with that are not without mediation, that are not without things, physicalities that that work upon the body to um, to bring about the cleaving of the life energy from the body itself. And that's a really interesting, I think, part to kind of land it for a little bit. I hope I don't get lost uh, in this, but um, what is it in science? I believe there is the question of, you know, how much or what kind, how to quantify the amount of trauma or the amount of something to the body that would cause its life to depart from it. I think there's that kind of. I'll have to. Actually, I am gonna look that up more specifically after this, and this is probably gonna turn into. I don't know what it's gonna turn into, but I will look that up after this. Just discussion to the question of any quantifying of, what is required basically for that cleaving of the life force from a body. Like when it happens, in a situation where a person is up and about and just drops dead, and they don't revive. Yeah, there's something that happened. Yeah, either in the body. There's something that happened in the body to cause it, the organs, the hardware to stop functioning, and that cessation of function from the hardware, meaning the body, causes a separation from that distinct life energy to leave it and to not come back to it. you know um, there are some that take the simpler approach of looking at man as the animal and just saying that there is no inner person. Consciousness is something that comes from the brain, and as soon as the brain stops, the brain stem is inactive, the heart, and therefore the brain stops, then that consciousness just shuts off and it's gone. And so that's a viewpoint that's widely held by atheists. But the spiritual paradigm insists upon this distinction between this inner life and this and this it being within a body. And so and so when you have those situations where a small thing, a blood clot or something, or a aneurysm takes place, there has to be something that happens to the body to cause that separation where the body is said to go up. I don't know if anyone has seen those videos of where something dies, an animal or something, and sometimes it's caught that some kind of what looks like a wisp of smoke or air or some kind of light or something is seen to go up from the body. It's there's claims and there's testimonials and even supposed footage of that occurring, both with humans and animals. So causing many to believe that that's the soul, or that's the life energy leaving the body. He even talks about, there's even conversation about the weight, ideas of the weight. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I do know for how much the soul weighs. I think it's it's a small amount, of course, but a surprisingly remarkable amount. But anyways, it's claimed that that in death cases, um, there is a recorded weight difference pre and post mortem that's attributed to this life energy, and it's kind of having a bit of mass or weight at least. So, gosh, so there are all these different ideas kind of that are out there, but so this life, given that if it is true that it is a thing that is inhabits a body and leaves a body, then and that it is true in following that it's God's life giving bringing it out and taking it in. Yeah, it again it just rings to me that I don't see how, even though it is not pleasurable for us as the creature, that it still is not a matter of a evilness or a overall a principle immorality of God, and on God's part, and the ways and the manner at which that it happens, to where I would agree that all that being the case, all those things being all that we've talked about being the case, that it's not even evil for God to allow for different degrees of impact to the body to cause that the manner of in which to cause that separation or that leaving, which, as I just said, this another thought, not really another thought, but another, I guess, side to view at this would be, I'm just going to touch on it real quick, but like in the instance where trauma is done to the body and the life leaves and doesn't come back, meaning cessation of life, death, or trauma done to the body where its life does remain, the life remains in the body, and the trauma of it and the suffering, while that's another area of so trauma or suffering that leads, that where death is, and trauma and suffering where life remains, and culpability of God in the allowance or commanding of that which would bring about the both of those. Because one could say, well, fine, all right, it's fine, but so what about when God allows trauma? And so, anyways, okay, not to get too far off that. So, anyways, the morality of God. Okay, so I think I do want to leave off for a short time, leave off from the morality of God point, and I feel that I'm being moved into, well, this line of thought is moving me into where I was talking about just the body, and how that fine, if we can grant that it is not immoral for God to cleave the life energy from the body. The ways that it's done, the way that the life is cleaved from the body, and the different accounts we have of the less traumatic to the very traumatic ways, and how the whole that whole rainbow of those trauma cases basically can fall under morality, righteousness, non-evilness of God. Like, for example, when when in the accounts of the Amalekites in the Canaanite campaign, it's people will, as they read and as they imagine what they're reading, they have these ideas, and I have too, when reading these accounts of just seeing, especially in situations where the whole population, the whole bloodline of a particular bloodline of a particular tribe was wiped out. God commanded it to be completely wiped out, even the animals, not to take anything, burn. Everything dies, and in kind of imagining how this happens and seeing these, I imagine, the visual picture of just seeing from the perspective of the people who say were raided, right? Seeing these marauders coming over, the hill, and just visualizing just this riding through or running through with their swords and things, and just indiscriminately killing everything, burning everything, nothing lives, babies, the whole deal. And so just imagining the scene, and of course, the scene is movies and depictions of contexts like that have definitely put into the minds of people, which I don't think erroneously, just how traumatic and how heinous and how bloody those kinds of situations are, and there's all kinds of kind of nuanced dynamics, in there that one can bring up to really, throw stones at the whole idea of goodness under the reality, under such realities. But and so what I want to the thought that I want to go into now is considerations regarding I guess I'll just call it the neutral plane in which we as human beings live in creation, with regards to, say, free will, free agency, free autonomy, that we experience. I think that going in, when we talk about the means of the severing of how the life force has severed from the body, and just in all the different ways that exist in reality, all the traumatic ways that we hear of in history and that we know of, done by serial killers and warriors and despots alike, all throughout, since the beginning of humanity. But considering this idea of the neutral plane of our shared autonomy. So I was listening to, as an audiobook. I didn't actually read this book, because I did listen to it, though. And I forget exactly the exact source, but it was expressed, the idea of, it was talking about free will, how it could be. And I believe I heard, yes, it was from a Christian theological apologetic standpoint. And I believe it might have been certain names are coming to mind, but I think it was different. It's been like as a club. It wasn't just one person who I heard this heard this idea articulated from. But just the idea of like how, in order for humanity to exist in a sphere, a reality where we are each free to have to make choice of volition, to do and to not do, and specifically to do good and to do evil, and how we would do it, that all those things have to be in place in order for this reality of that we translate as being a reality of free will. It's arguable, but at least free volition, there's an understanding that there has to be a kind of a neutrality to things, like the certain laws. Like for example, it was stated specifically in this one of the talks I heard that just about the laws of nature and how gravity, for example, has to work for the good guys and the bad guys. The same gravity and the same laws of physics that enable a bullet to fly through the air and hit a target and take into end its life. It has to work for everyone, the good and the bad. Like there would be a manifest and even I guess the idea is manifest and even a very harmful or hellish type of reality where the natural laws were manipulated based on the intent of a free agent working upon it, okay, working in it. So in the instance of a person shooting another person, if the person shooting the other person is if it's a good thing, if it's a heroic context that it's happening, and that the person being shot is an evildoer, and that the person shooting is a good doer in the highest sense, that that in that instance gravity and stuff and the laws of physics would work in a particular way that are different from the way it would work in the context if the shooter was a evil person and the person being shot was a good person. That the reality where that would be the case would just be it just wouldn't. We have a hard time seeing that, and we have a hard time seeing how it would be, why, how that would be the case. It just doesn't seem, something about that, at least to me, doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem as free. It seems to be something different than what the human experience is meant to be, purposed to be. So, almost this reality that there has to be this neutral plane, that people there has to be enough neutrality in the material world in order for the consequences, the falling out of things to happen in certain ways. So, you know, the lopping off of a head is just what it is, no matter what the agents involved are. For example. So if that can be established, then it would follow, I believe, the idea of why something like, I want to say, I guess something like a unfolding narrative, an unfolding story that makes the history of story, the history of happening, of how things, in the many different ways that things happen, the many different ways that people die, the many different ways that wrong and danger and all those things can happen. All that is undergirded by this neutrality of the sphere in which we live, a neutral field, which all the free agents, meaning human beings that come in and go out, the things that take place. And even beyond that, not just the actions of human beings on another, but the multiplicity of things that occur in nature. How and why those things are of course debated, and that's not the purpose of quite yet of where we're at here, but yeah, all those things are play a part. So yeah, the neutral field as to the question that will just naturally come from the consideration of how life is taken from the body, separated from the body, and any morality or immorality on the part of the superintendent of the reality under which that kind of thing happens. Um, it's it. I am able to see how it can be the case. Therefore, another reason why I don't just jump into the idea of well, a God that can allow those kind of things can happen and even command those kinds of things, can be evil, even with consideration of the ugliness of the trauma and the understood, the known, fear experience on the part of the individual that undergoes such trauma, and all the different things that accompany it, all the different things that accompany it, and how all that can be still wrapped in the kind of a context of it's not evil that took place. That there's a bigger there's a bigger thing. And so anyway, that touches into the kind of the area of like maybe the anthropomorphization of just how Christians say, and sometimes it can be used kind of tried and people get irritated with it, but just the mystery, God's ways aren't our ways. And so from a lack of articulation of the understanding behind that kind of that saying, it opens up the room for a lot of frustration in that regard. So, I'm gonna maybe leave off from here. I think I'm gonna have to continue on this talk in another segment, but just talking over the claimed immorality of God with regard to things, the evil, or just the wrong, the suffering, and the evil on the part of mankind done in the world, specifically in the Old Testament. As we look over the Old Testament narratives, I know I haven't gone specifically into some of these. I'm just brainstorming right now, but but yeah, the all these and more are in the scriptures and certain passages and can be looked at more closely, and stuff. So I'm going to come back to this in some time and continue on. Bye for now.